Well, it's a great time for audiophiles. Sheffield, one of the world's top documentary festivals, have just announced an inaugural audio documentary award. And as I tweeted, at last the word documentary is not assumed to mean film. Now, I'm not here to put down film and TV. I love Breaking Bad and Mad Men as much as anybody. But I do want to affirm the power, the subtlety, and the complexity of voice and of audio. So many of you, I'm sure, listen to the fabulous stories we can now get via the miracle of podcasting from all around the world. And what a change from when you had to stay home to catch your favourite show. My rhythms used to revolve around Radio National's schedule. So Sunday night, I'd be chopping vegetables to the soothing tones of Alistair Cook's Letter from America. Obviously hit a nerve there. And they were masterpieces of social commentary served up as story. And it was the story and Cook's reassuring voice that made them so captivating that they ran for over 50 years. So it's those simple but essential elements of story and voice that I'd like to share with you today. Now, due to time constraints, I won't be able to get into the other key aspects of audio storytelling, such as soundscape and collage and montage sound, but I can promise you a close encounter with a stallion. Now, I'll start in the Kimberley in northwest Australia, and just a warning that you may hear the voices of deceased Indigenous persons. So in 2000, I went to Broome, and I met an extrovert Aboriginal broadcaster called Mark Bin Barker, who told me I should interview his mother, as she'd been raised by Irish nuns. Now, I had to break it to Mark gently that I had left Ireland largely to get away from Irish nuns. But of course, what he was really telling me was that she was one of the stolen generations. And their voices were then rarely heard. Academics and politicians discussed the policy, and a royal commission had been held, but in public we rarely heard the actual voices of those who were personally affected. So I'm going to play you one now. Her name is Daisy Howard, and she's a friend of Mark's mother. She was raised in Beagle Bay near Broome. And I want you to listen out for the little girl in the background, her grandchild, who seems to me like almost the embodiment of the toddler Daisy was when she was taken. Now, the sound quality is far from perfect. Nearby, there's a man fixing Daisy's house because a cyclone had just ripped through Broome, and all I could do was get him to promise to put away his power tools, but we had to cope with the hammer, which you'll hear. But I think even though the quality isn't great, later you'll find much better quality recordings, I think her story comes through. So Daisy starts by saying how her mother has been lost to her.
I can't remember my mother. I was taken from her when I was about two or three. I'm just going by my welfare papers now, what I got. Well, I haven't seen my mother again, never again. I was 68 or 9, I went back up there. That's when I see my sister for the first time in Halls Creek, and we're really shy too for each other, sort of. Not close in a way, When they took me, I could speak my language, but we just lost it. There was no one to talk to and keep up our culture and everything. We just lost everything. That's what I'm really sorry about. Not when I see little kids my that age now talking and things. I just always think back for what I used to, like what I lost. I feel really sad about it.
So when you went to Beagle Bay, what was it like being brought up by the nuns? As a child, can you remember how you felt?
They really made us feel that we were part of a family, We felt really good. I was still lonely, and sometimes I can remember crying ourselves to sleep, but we got on really well with everyone, we loved the nuns.
And so when you go back to where you were originally from, do you still feel a sense of connection to that country?
I do, yeah. When I go back there, I still feel it. I cry too.
So it's simple, heartfelt emotion that audio captures so well. We're not distracted by how someone looks, whether they're old, whether they're young, fat, ugly, black or white. We can focus on their essence, their voice, their tone, their words, even their breathing. Daisy has restraint and dignity, but there's no hiding the sadness. Her friend Phyllis has one memory of her mother. Phyllis was 3 when her mother took her to a hospital in Derby when she had a fever. The doctors passed her out the back door to the authorities, and she was raised by the same John of God nuns. When she was 17, she was working in a hospital when she was told she had a visitor. Neither woman, it's very poignant, neither woman could recognise the other.
It just happened that my mother came once to see me, but she was hurt. I could understand. She was upset. I mean, taking a child away at a small age and then going back to see the mother as an adult. Well, she would be shocked, I suppose, thinking, no, you're not my daughter. But that was the first and the last I've seen her.
So Phyllis never saw her mother again, and I think the palpable melancholic sort of undertow in her voice is enough to tell us how she feels about that. We don't need further words. But the story I found was complicated because the women liked the nuns, and the nuns actually were fighting their own battles. Under the sexist dispensations of church hierarchy, the females, for instance, didn't get to use the one mission vehicle. The nuns and the girls had to walk in the hot sun. So I asked one nun, Sister Pat, an important question, and I think you'll hear how she genuinely seems to struggle to understand her role.
Did it ever occur to you to question why people were taking children away from their parents?
No, I don't think it did. As women, we reacted to kids that came and we took them, cared for them, loved them, grew them up, but really didn't know, even ourselves or the other sisters, much about the wider world. The kids were there for education. I suppose how they got there, we didn't question.
So I think audio opens up a space that video, say, precludes. If we were watching Sister Pat in a Catholic context, near a church or a crucifix, we'd subliminally form a judgment, pro or anti, depending on our religious or political views. But just hearing that sigh she gives at the start, to me, makes it more complicated. She's conflicted. It turns out that those nuns were actually proto-feminists. They defied the government intention not to have smart blacks, and they even taught them Shakespeare. Jimmy Chai, who wrote the musical Brand New Day, was educated by them, and another pupil, a girl, got a scholarship to high school, which was a very rare thing. So audio also trumps video, in my view, in that it's far less intrusive and therefore far more likely to capture revealing moments. And I've got a rare insight into a key moment in Australian history coming up. I interviewed lots of migrants who had worked on the Snowy Mountains hydro scheme after World War II, and we know that it couldn't have been built without them and that it was the start of the multicultural Australia that we have today. But how was that decision made to vary the demographic from this long-standing Anglo-Celtic tradition? Well, in 1947, the UN had 3 million refugees to deal with, and the secretary of the Relief and Rehabilitation Administration was Robert Jackson, who was an Australian. And he thought Prime Minister Ben Chifley might be interested in taking some of them. So here's his rather colourful memory of how it was proposed.
And I went with General Kennan and saw Mr. Chifley. He certainly was a most remarkable man. Could never get his pipe to light. Oh, matches going over his shoulder all the time. Oh, how many do you want us to take? And I said, well, sir, can you take 100,000? Why should we take 100,000? I said, the logic there is whoever gets the first 100,000 is going to get the absolute cream of the crop, or whatever you like. He thought that was good logic. Then he said, hold on, there are not too many Poles. We don't want a Buffalo City in Australia. So I said, no, you didn't take too many Poles. There are plenty of bolts and others as well. Anyway, he said, we'll do it. Then he added the boys, presumably that was the cabinet, wouldn't like it. But I'll convince Arthur, that I think it was Mr. Cornwall, it will be done.
What an amazing moment. just for the record, courtesy of ABC Archives, what a footnote. And by the way, audio trumps print in some degree as well, because you try spelling, which I had to do for my book. But where audio really triumphs is in creating connection with the listener. As you listen in real time, particularly to someone in an emotional state, you develop what I call a pact of intimacy. You have to fixedly watch film, but sound envelops you. It comes with you in the car and surrounds you in the kitchen. So take this clip from Susan Timmins from my Marrying Out series for the ABC RN. Susan's mother, Julia, was the eldest of 11 children in an Irish Catholic family in Maitland in the 20s. They ran the general store and they had one of the first cars in town. Their mechanic, Errol White, was a Protestant. So what, I can hear anybody under 50 asking. But older folk will remember that in pre-multicultural Australia, society was polarised into just two groups, Catholics and Protestants. And somewhere in a Queensland museum there's an item that's testament to this, a brochure called The Protestant's Guide to Shopping in Rockhampton. Imagine you could transact all your business without having to meet a reprobate Catholic. But back in Maitland, facing family fury, Julia and Errol eloped. Julia was immediately cut out of the family, and when she returned because her father was dying some years later, her mother barred the way on the veranda and she never saw him. She and Errol married and had Susan, but when Susan was 2, Julia died in childbirth. Errol had nowhere to turn. This was the 40s. His family derided the 2 children as bog Irish, while Julia's family maintained the fatwa, until decades later, a brother contacted Errol.
And my father arranged, we all went out to dinner together. Wouldn't this be a lovely bonding thing? Well, you can't take somebody who's had no contact with their mother's family for 30 or 40 years and then take you all out to dinner and expect that we would all be hunky-dory. I was hunky-dory enough in a polite situation until I'd had a few drinks, and I suppose I then had to ask the question, just why? I said, you have to forgive me, but I'm antagonistic towards my mother's family. It's all right for you to swan in from overseas and say hi to my father, but did you ever care about what happened to us children? Did you ever care what happened to us as kids? Did you ever care that my father was in such a dire situation that he had to put his children into an orphanage? He described that... Sorry. God, was this ridiculous? I'm 65. But he always described that as being the most terrible, terrible time of his life. He said it was bad enough when his wife died, but to have to put his 2 children in an orphanage because he couldn't support them. It was after the war. The widows were getting war widows' pensions and things, but he got nothing.
Now that is the effective power of audio storytelling. I could feel in the room people's empathy. I could feel that you could feel her pain. And in fact, I know someone who did a PhD on sectarianism, and he told me that this audio captured something his 100,000 word dissertation could not, and that was the pain it had caused. It's a shock for us to hear how such a confident, worldly sounding woman as Susan was at the beginning can disintegrate even years later, recalling this event. But let me say, she wants it to be played to show the awful impact of religious bigotry. We shouldn't forget here that audio is a two-way street. Being listened to can also be transformative. And the inimitable American oral historian and broadcaster Studs Terkel loved to tell a story about this. One day he's in a rundown part of Chicago and he sees a woman staring into an empty shop window with her children around. And curious, he asks, what's she looking at? And she says, just dreams. So he asks if she'll tell him more, and he whips out his ever-present tape recorder. And afterwards one of the kids says, hey, mister, can you play it? Can we hear? So he plays it back and the woman listens intently, and then she says, well, until I heard that, I never knew I felt that way. Just so fabulous. Some people call that validation. Just being really listened to can help you make sense of your life. Now, I promised you a stallion, and we're hearing in the background what we call radio as theatre of the mind. That the claim that radio makes better pictures than TV, because in a well-crafted radio feature, with these kind of eavesdropping audio scenes, you are the co-creator. This is recorded by Tom Morton for ABC 360 Documentaries for an investigation into the competing industries of coal and horse breeding. So you can probably imagine what that stallion is doing. He's been brought into a caged area to service a mare, and we're actually listening to one of their private moments. So this is classic radio making theatre of the mind, and I'd love to go down that path with more, but I can't. No time. I'll just let Tom comment.
Well, he's a very efficient chap. That was all over in probably under a minute.
So listening in real time. Now I'm going to end with a story from the US show Radiolab. It's about Emily, a young art student in New York, who's in a coma in hospital with hideous injuries after being hit by a truck. Her boyfriend Alan and her mother Susan have kept vigil by her bedside for weeks, and they want Emily sent to a rehab centre for treatment, but the doctors are saying it won't work unless she can be reached. So one night, in despair, Alan remembers Helen Keller, the deaf, blind and mute girl who was taught to communicate through finger typing words on her hand. And he tries it with Emily, and when he types, I love you, lo and behold, she responds, but in a neutral, non-Emily kind of way. She doesn't connect his name or the words with it being her, Alan. Now, he records this conversation on his mobile as evidence, and we can just listen to it now.
What is your name?
What? W-H-A-T?
What
Is. I-S.
is car? What is your name? Emily. Let me spell it for you.
Can we stop it there? So this is an amazing moment because she's actually come back out of this coma and she knows who she is. They've made a connection. She's clearly not a vegetable, but she's still not her. Now, Alan now asks her through finger typing if he can put in her hearing aids, which she's resisted before. She's been deaf since she was little. Emily says okay, and listen to what happens next.
He said, Emily.
Emily, can you hear me? It's me, Alan. And immediately,
everything came back to me. I was there. I remembered everything.
The door opened and Emily stepped out.
she was back.
Yeah, that's just like hearing his voice. I knew it was him, and then she said my mom was there.
And I heard her say what I had been waiting for her to say all those weeks.
I screamed, Mommy, Mommy.
She said, Mama.
You know, I couldn't believe they were there the whole time.
So the stakes just don't get much bigger than that, really. Audio, the sound of someone's voice brings Emily back into full consciousness. And you can actually hear how her personality is fully present there, whereas before she showed cognition, but she didn't really know who she was. That show is called Finding Emily. You can actually Google it. And I think I might actually, it's definitely what I'd call a driveway moment. There are lots more online. I'm happy to guide you to them if I get a chance, including to some of my own. But I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much.